Welcome back. Today, we are stepping into a story shaped by water, memory, and the quiet power of belief. Throughout history, rivers have been both lifelines and boundaries, places that nourish communities, while also reminding us of forces we cannot fully control. In Vietnam, one of the most enduring figures associated with these waters is Haba, a traditional water deity believed to watch over rivers, lakes, and streams. Rather than being simply a myth, Haba represents something deeper, the way people interpret the natural world when it feels larger than human understanding. In many villages, Haba was seen not only as a guardian, but as a presence with temperament and intention. Calm waters could be read as a sign of harmony and balance, while sudden storms or unpredictable currents were viewed as responses to disrespect or neglect. This belief reflects a long-standing cultural way of connecting nature with spirit, where the environment is alive, conscious, and responsive. When communities relied heavily on fishing, farming, and river travel, the behavior of the water shaped their survival. The river was a provider, but it was also unpredictable. To make sense of this uncertainty, people personalized the water through stories about Ha, stories that helped express respect, caution, and humility. This deity became a symbol of the delicate relationship between humans and the natural forces surrounding them. These beliefs were not only spiritual, they were practical. Treating the river as a being encouraged people to observe it carefully, approach it with awareness, and acknowledge its risks. It was a form of traditional wisdom, communicated through narrative rather than measurement. Even today, when we understand hydrology through science, the symbolism of Haba continues to reflect a timeless truth. Water sustains life, and yet, it remains something we cannot fully command. By looking at Haba, we are really exploring the conversation between human belief and the natural world. The ways we try to explain what feels mysterious, powerful, and beyond our control. Haba is often described with a dual nature, reflecting how water itself behaves. On one hand, rivers can bring life. They irrigate fields, feed crops, sustain fish, and become paths for travel and trade. On the other hand, rivers can change suddenly, rising without warning, shifting currents, or creating hidden depths that catch even experienced swimmers by surprise. In traditional Vietnamese belief, these two sides of the river became connected to the personality of Ha Ba. When the river appeared calm, generous, and steady, people believed Ha Ba was in a peaceful state, allowing the community to gather water, fish, and farm safely. During these times, Haba was spoken of with gratitude, sometimes compared to a quiet guardian who watches over daily life. Villagers might offer small gestures of thanks, such as burning incense or releasing flowers onto the surface of the water. These acts were not grand ceremonies, but simple acknowledgments of the presence they believed lived beneath the waves. However, when storms arrived, or the water shifted in ways that felt threatening, Haba's character was understood differently. Sudden floods or strong whirlpools were seen as signs of displeasure or imbalance. This was not framed as punishment in a moral sense, but as a reminder of respect and awareness. Nature was not to be taken for granted. People learned early that overconfidence near deep water could be dangerous. The mythology of Haba helped translate this reality into a story, making the lesson memorable and widely understood. This dual image, protective and unpredictable, shaped how generations interacted with rivers. It encouraged caution without fear, reverence without avoidance. It offered a way for communities to acknowledge that water can be generous and sustaining, but it must always be approached thoughtfully. In this sense, The stories of Haba are not just legends. They are reflections of how people, long before modern science, developed emotional and cultural tools to navigate a world where nature was powerful and unpredictable. For many communities living near rivers, lakes, and wetlands, unexpected drownings were not viewed as accidents in the modern sense. When someone disappeared beneath the water, especially without struggle or warning, people believed that Haba had claimed a life. This interpretation was not rooted in fear, but in a worldview where nature and spirit were deeply connected. If the river took someone, it was thought to be part of a larger balance, something beyond human explanation, yet not without meaning. In traditional life, the river was so familiar that sudden loss felt shocking. People who grew up swimming or fishing could still vanish in calm conditions. When no sign of danger was visible, the event felt mysterious. To make sense of these moments, families and neighbors turned to the stories they had always known. Abba called, and someone answered. This idea allowed grief to take a form that felt understandable, and it offered a way to speak about loss without placing blame or demanding answers the world could not provide. This belief also encouraged a kind of reverence. People would avoid pointing or shouting loudly at the riverbank. Children were taught to show respect when crossing bridges or walking beside the water. Before major events such as building boats, opening new fishing seasons, or traveling through unfamiliar waterways, families might offer a quiet prayer or light incense, asking for safe passage. These customs were not simply superstition. They were expressions of awareness that the river, while helpful, could also be unpredictable. In many stories, once Haba had taken someone, the community held ceremonies to guide the spirit home, acknowledging both the sorrow of loss and the enduring presence of the water deity. The river was never seen as cruel. It was simply powerful, and humans were reminded of their smallness in its presence. This belief shaped not only emotion, but behavior. It taught caution, humility, and respect values that remained essential even as scientific explanations for water danger gradually became understood. In many regions, the relationship between people and Haba was not distant or abstract. It was maintained through small, regular acts of acknowledgement. Before traveling across a river, casting a fishing net, or beginning irrigation for the season, families or entire villages would pause for a brief moment of respect. These gestures varied from place to place, but they shared a common purpose: to honor the presence believed to reside in the water and to ask for safety. Offerings were often simple and symbolic. Villagers might place fresh flowers, rice grains, or a cup of tea near the riverbank. Incense could be lit in silence as smoke drifted over the water. In some communities, small paper boats holding candles were released into the current, creating a soft trail of light across the surface at dusk. These practices were not meant to persuade or bargain, but to express gratitude and humility. The river was essential to life, and honoring Haba was a way of acknowledging that dependence with sincerity. During festivals or special seasons, the rituals sometimes grew larger. Traditional songs or chants might be performed, echoing along the water. Families gathered together, reminding one another that the river's generosity could not be taken for granted. Elders would often tell stories of ancestors who relied on Haba's favor, reinforcing cultural memory and continuity. These customs also created a shared emotional understanding. Standing at the river's edge during an offering was a moment to slow down, observe the current, and recognize how deeply connected the community was to the environment. Even without scientific knowledge, the rituals taught carefulness. They reminded people not to underestimate the river's strength, even on days when it looked calm and still. Over time, as modernization reshaped daily life, many of these practices have softened or disappeared. Yet traces of them remain. small gestures made in quiet moments, or the instinct to pause before stepping into deep water. The rituals may have changed, but the message persists. Nature is not separate from us, and acknowledging its power is a way of living with awareness and respect. Across many regions, stories circulated about certain river bends, deep pools, or quiet stretches of water that seemed to swallow people. These places were often described as calm on the surface, but unpredictable underneath. The water might appear smooth, almost inviting, yet those who stepped too close could disappear in a moment. In local storytelling, these spots were believed to be especially tied to Haba, places where the deity's presence was strongest. Villagers passed down warnings from one generation to the next. Do not play near that bend. Do not swim where the water turns dark. Do not cross there during certain seasons. These cautions were not meant to frighten children, but to protect them. Even without scientific terms, people recognize patterns. They noticed that some currents changed direction quickly, or that certain areas had unusual depths. But rather than describing these places in technical language, they used narrative and myth to make the lesson memorable. Some tales told of people who were simply walking along the bank when a slip of the foot brought them into the water, where the current pulled them away before anyone could react. Other stories spoke of travelers who attempted to swim across a narrow section of the river and were suddenly drawn downward. These accounts often emphasized how fast everything happened, how silent, how final. In the cultural imagination, the river in these moments felt alive. It did not just move. It acted. Assigning intention to the water helped people express the grief and confusion that followed unexpected loss. It turned the river from a passive landscape into something with personality, something that required respect and care. Even today, when rivers are mapped, measured, and studied, the language of these old warnings has a quiet truth. Certain waters are more dangerous than others, not because of spirits choosing, but because of shifting currents, hidden channels, and natural forces that remain beyond immediate visibility. The stories of rivers that swallow people are, in a sense, poetic ways of remembering that nature can change in an instant. In many traditional stories, the world beneath the river was imagined not as empty darkness, but as a realm with structure and purpose, a kind of spirit court belonging to Haba. People believed that under the surface existed a community, a place where souls of those taken by the water continued to exist, not in pain or punishment, but as part of another world. This idea offered a way to understand what could not be seen, the unseen depth of the river, the silence below the current, the powerful sense of mystery in deep water. In some stories, those who drowned were thought to become attendants, guardians, or helpers in Haba's domain. The image was not frightening, it was solemn. It suggested that life did not simply end, but shifted to another environment with its own order. Storytellers described underwater palaces made of glimmering shells and river stone, lit by reflections of the surface above. Some tales even spoke of Ha-Ba holding gatherings, where the spirits moved calmly like currents themselves. This narrative helped families cope with loss. Instead of imagining a loved one as gone, they imagined them continuing in another form, playing a role in a realm connected to their home. The river was not a faraway afterlife. It was right beside them every day. The presence of their loved ones felt near, not distant. This concept also shaped the tone of rituals and remembrance. Rather than fear, there was reverence. Ceremonies along the riverbank often carried a quiet dignity. The water was approached as a threshold, thin, shimmering, always moving, holding worlds above and below. In a broader sense, the idea of a spirit court beneath the water reflects a universal human instinct to give shape to the unknown. When something cannot be seen, we imagine. When something feels powerful, we give it identity. And when life confronts us with mystery, we create meaning to steady our hearts. Here, Haba becomes not only a deity, but a symbol of continuity of how water connects life, memory, and the quiet depths of what we cannot fully understand. In many communities, when someone's life was lost to the river, remembrance was not only a family matter, it became a shared act involving neighbors and the surrounding environment. The belief that the river held a spiritual presence shaped the way people honored those who had passed. Instead of seeing the event as random or meaningless, they understood it within the larger relationship between humans and water. This gave grief a language and a path. On the anniversary of a drowning, families often returned to the riverbank with offerings. These were usually modest: a bowl of rice, a cup of tea, flowers, or incense. The act itself mattered more than the items. It was a moment to acknowledge the connection between the living, the lost, and the river that moved steadily nearby. Standing there, people watched the current and spoke softly, as if the water could listen. These memorial practices served several emotional purposes. They allowed families to express love and remembrance in a peaceful, structured way. They also helped the community process the event together. The river was not blamed, nor was the person. The ritual affirmed a shared understanding. The water is powerful, and life is delicate. By returning to the river each year, people recognize this truth again and again in a gentle rhythm of reflection. Children often took part in these gatherings. In doing so, they learned lessons about respect not only for nature, but for the experiences of others. They learned that remembrance is not something to be rushed or hidden, but held with care. This intergenerational passing of values is part of what allowed the stories of Haba to endure so long. Even today, some families quietly maintain these traditions. They may no longer speak openly of Haba, but the gestures remain: the flowers placed on the water, the incense burned at the shore, the silent moment of watching the river's movement. The belief may evolve, but the feeling behind it remains constant. Memory carried by the flow of water, steady and unending. As time passed and scientific understanding of waterways improved, many of the events once attributed to Haba began to be explained through observable natural patterns. Hydrology, the study of how water moves, revealed that rivers are far more complex beneath the surface than they appear from above. What looks calm can hide strong currents, shifting layers of water, and sudden changes in depth. These elements can create situations where a person loses balance or is pulled under before they have time to react. One key factor is the presence of underwater drop-offs, where the riverbed shifts dramatically from shallow to deep. A few steps forward can mean going from firm footing to sudden depth, and if the water is moving, the transition can catch even skilled swimmers by surprise. In addition to this, reverse currents, currents that move in a different direction from the visible flow, can quietly draw someone away from the shore. These forces are often invisible, making the river feel deceptively safe. When the river's surface is smooth, it does not necessarily mean the water beneath is still. Temperature differences, seasonal rainfall, and shifts in the riverbed can create motion below that cannot be seen from above. In certain places, especially where two water flows meet, whirlpools can form. These are not cinematic swirling vortices, but subtle downward pulls strong enough to cause disorientation. Understanding these scientific explanations does not diminish the emotional or cultural meaning of the older beliefs. Instead, it adds another layer to the relationship between people and the river. The stories of Haba provided caution and respect long before scientific tools existed. Now, science simply gives us a clearer way to describe what communities have known for generations. Water deserves awareness. It is powerful, changeable, and deeply connected to the shape of the land beneath it. Even with all our modern knowledge, the river remains something more than just a physical feature. Science explains the movement, but the feeling, the sense of wonder and caution continues. Whirlpools are one of the most commonly mentioned features in stories about rivers that take people. In traditional belief, these swirling currents were often linked to the presence or mood of Haba. But from a scientific perspective, whirlpools form when water moving quickly meets an obstacle or a sudden change in direction. The pressure and speed of the flow create a rotating motion, drawing objects toward the center. Even when the whirlpool looks small or gentle from above, the movement beneath can be surprisingly strong. Whirlpools often appear near places where two streams meet, where water flows around rocks, or where the riverbed dips into a deeper basin. The whirlpool itself does not always look dramatic. In many cases, the surface appears to ripple softly, without the large visible spiral that people imagine. This is part of what makes them dangerous. They do not look threatening. Someone may step into the water expecting a light current, only to feel the force pulling downward. Once caught in a whirlpool, the instinctive reaction is to struggle upward. However, the current beneath the surface usually moves outward and downward before releasing the person at a calmer point. Fighting directly against the pull can cause exhaustion. This is why even strong swimmers may find themselves overwhelmed. The phenomenon feels sudden and mysterious, especially when the river appears calm. In earlier times, when people did not have language to describe pressure gradients, water displacement, or current convergence, the behavior of whirlpools seemed intentional. It made sense to explain them through story and spirit, a presence in the water making choices. These stories served a purpose. They taught people to avoid certain areas and to treat water with awareness. Today, we can map and predict some whirlpools, but not all. Rivers change constantly with rainfall, sediment movement, and seasonal shifts. The whirlpool remains a reminder that the natural world is dynamic and sometimes silent about its changes. Understanding how they form allows us to see the river not as unpredictable magic, but as a force that moves according to patterns that can be respected and learned. The stories of Ha and the scientific understanding of rivers may seem different at first, but they actually speak to the same human experience, living alongside a force that is powerful, unpredictable, and deeply connected to daily life. Myth offers meaning through narrative. Science offers understanding through observation. Both are ways of trying to make sense of something that cannot be controlled. In earlier generations, storytelling was the most effective way to pass knowledge down. A child may not understand currents, pressure, or changing riverbeds, but they will remember a story about Haba and the importance of being careful near the water. These stories encouraged respect, humility, and awareness. They taught people that nature has rules, even if those rules were not written. Science does not replace these stories. It gives them another layer. Today, we know how water moves, how whirlpools are formed, and why some areas of a river are far more dangerous than they appear. This understanding allows us to describe the river in measurable terms. But the emotional truth remains the same. Water gives life, and it can also take life. It requires caution, attention, and respect. The coexistence of belief and science reflects something universal in human thought. Myths are not merely incorrect explanations. They are cultural memory, emotional truth, and a way of expressing wonder. Science adds clarity, but wonder remains. Standing at the edge of a wide, quiet river, watching the surface ripple and shift, it is easy to understand why people felt a presence there. Even with all our knowledge, the river still feels alive. And so, Ha-Ba remains part of the story, not as a literal figure for everyone, but as a reminder of how humans connect meaning to the world around them. The river is not just water. It is history, livelihood, memory, and mystery. Whether spoken through myth or science, the message is the same. Approach with awareness and never forget the depth just beneath the surface. As we look back across these stories, rituals, and explanations, one theme stands out. Rivers have always been places where the human world meets something larger. Whether understood through the figure of Ha-Ba or through the language of hydrology and natural science, the message is remarkably consistent. Water sustains life, shapes landscapes, and supports communities. But it also carries risks that must be respected. The myths helped earlier generations remember this truth. Science helps us describe it today. Both approaches remind us that nature is not something to be controlled entirely, but something to move alongside with awareness and care. Standing by a river, it is easy to feel the quiet pull of history in the current. Stories of the past linger there, just below the surface, flowing with the water that never stops moving. And perhaps that is why the myth of Ha-Ba endures, not as a literal figure for everyone, but as a symbol of how we recognize the depth, beauty, and unpredictability of the natural world. Thank you for spending this time here today. If this story brought you something to think about, or simply kept you company for a while, I am glad. Take care near the water, stay mindful, and stay curious. See you again in the next story.